All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and first and foremost, want to give a few shout outs out there, real quick. I had somebody here in my email actually ask me a little bit about some summer reading that they might want to just some, just ask me for some books that I thought might be really interesting. First off, I wanted to not only give you a small little list of some of my favorites, but also want to give a shout out there to Blue Ridge Bigfoot. Get out there, check that out, guys. Great Bigfoot campfire stories and things like that. Just awesome stuff based on true encounter stories, just like it is here. Um, also, want to give a shout out to Gunnar Monson over there. You guys, everybody in with the Olympia project, and also over at Sasquatch Coffee. Thanks, guys, for just all your research, and thanks, Gunnar, for that awesome, awesome coffee, man. It's just great. All right, as far as those books are concerned, one of my very favorites is actually comes from a very good friend of mine, William Jevening. It's called Notes from the Field: Tracking North America Sasquatch. There is an updated version of it. I think it's a great version. I've got the original, and I have to say it's one of my very favorite books. Period. Another one, my second favorite book out here actually comes from somebody I also met. It's Robert Michael Pyle's "Where Bigfoot Walks," the updated version. This is the latest one. You'll see that it has kind of a foresty scene in the back. It's yellow on the front. It's Where Bigfoot Walks. It's really, really good. Author is Robert Michael Pyle. Another one is North America's Great Ape, The Sasquatch by John A. Bendernagel. I mean, you guys all know he had passed away recently, and I have to say he did a really, really awesome job with this research for this book. Another one. Actually, there's a couple more that come from William Jevning, but I have to say, other than Notes from the Field, I would grab Haunted Valley. It's a great, great book. I think you guys will absolutely love it. It's awesome. It's great. And if you're looking for some of those fictional novels, kind of the campfire stories, something that you can kind of curl up with on a summer evening on the old porch and just read for a while you're sipping that cold beer or that iced coffee or iced tea, I'm telling you right now, there's nothing better than J.P. Choquette, Shadow in the Woods. I suggest that one. I've actually read that myself, got an autographed copy. It's just a great book. Some other ones that I absolutely love, just for some quick mentions, I really enjoy Rusty Wilson's campfire stories. That was kind of an inspiration for me when I started putting together all these based on true encounters and reports and stuff and turning them into campfire stories here. Um, that was kind of an inspiration for me. And so if you want to know where I got inspired, that was pretty much it. So there you go. Those are my picks for summer reading. So if you want to get out there and grab some of those, I'll have a resources page out here shortly. I know I've been promising for a month to have that up, but I have been so busy. Let me take a sip of this. Awesome Sasquatch coffee. So, with that, let's get into this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. I think you're going to like this one. Vacationers get a Bigfoot visit near Lake of the Woods, Oregon. So, Bigfoot is real and real scary. Well, at least scary looking for sure. Here is what my family and I experienced up around Lake of the Woods recreation area while staying in a vacation home. It was a very frightening moment for my family and I, but I want to share what we saw and what we heard. Personally, I never thought something like that existed, especially in a day and age of drones and Google Maps. But here is what happened on our family vacation to Southern Oregon and the Lake of the Woods area. Lake of the Woods and Bigfoot. I have a friend who had an experience later on in the Fish Lake area. Today, my favorite phrase to him is, "I told you so." No, I do not rub it in. It is all fun in the end, the banter, that is. But the fact of what we saw and experienced was not. This happened back in 1991 for us. But for the sake of the owners and of the vacation rental, I will keep the exact location and dates we were there to myself. I'd hate to hurt their business, as the family who owns it still runs and operates the same place today. But this was on the back side of the Lake of the Woods in southern Oregon, and during a spring break. Around that time. At that point, we still had our two children at home, one 12, the other 16, one boy and one girl who was younger. We decided to take our family spring break vacation that year in southern Oregon, a place a couple years later we'd moved to. My job took me there. It was not a spur of the moment decision at all, it was out of necessity. But we do love it here, and we had fun on that vacation even after a night of being, well, I guess bothered or harassed by a Bigfoot. It was a Bigfoot. We know. I know. My wife and I had seen it, and my wife would get the best and most frightening view of this thing. Heck, she saw this thing face to face practically right outside the window. So, we decided on a vacation rental home instead of a cabin that year. The weather was going to be back and forth all week, but there was plenty of sun for the Pacific Northwest expected, and that was fine with us. Being from the Bay Area, we were used to rain, overcast days, and of course the sun that can peek through and actually stay for some time. What did peek through our window was something we didn't expect, however. Loving the woods of Oregon. We had been through Oregon before several times. I have a brother that lives up near Eugene, Oregon. The drive was always fun once you reached Redding, California, and beyond. The Pacific Northwest is beautiful, and living here has actually been pretty nice, quiet, peaceful, even during those teen years with our kids. But before we moved here, we had planned a trip in a pretty big, but at a pretty big and beautiful lake and resort called Lake of the Woods. We have been back there several times and like to fish both that lake and Howard Prairie when possible. But Lake of the Woods has always been a sort of place for the wife and I, a sort of special place. Even the kids, for that matter, as this was the place we'd come to realize that Bigfoot were in fact real. Until you see one, it's true. You simply will not believe 100%. I know the evidence of them existing may not be as prevalent and substantial as their being a creator and all, but there is enough to at least give those of us that have experienced and seen one for ourselves a little space and benefit of the doubt. Right? Right. Personally, I never shared our encounter story with more than a handful of people. I was not up for any of the weird looks or reality shaming, I suppose. But what we observed and what my wife saw just a few feet away was real, as real as a bear in the woods. We made the reservations knowing that spring in Oregon could be rather spotty at best as far as weather was and is concerned. The weather itself turned out to be half gray and rainy and half sunny and only nippy. The best of both worlds, I guess. We would be there for 5 nights, 6 days of just living in the comfort of a lakeside home, enjoying canoeing, fishing, yes, campfires too in the backyard. Matter of fact, the lake was literally within 20 yards of that backyard. There was still snow on the ground here and there in the area where the sun hardly hit during the day, basically in the shadows. But the frozen water felt frozen. It was no longer covered in ice as it can be during a harsher winter. That year, I take it the weather was not as wet and cold as usual. I remember there being talk about droughts around the general store. There were some nasty fires later that summer, I heard later on. But back to our Bigfoot encounter. We were to be there 5 nights, and even though we'd encountered something pretty scary and amazing not halfway through our trip, we stayed the entire time. Bigfoot on the horizon. The first night in our arrival that day was pretty uneventful. We stopped at the general store before rounding the lake and getting to the house, and that's where I heard all the stories about droughts and whatnot. We got the latest news on the weather, the area, and what was happening around the lake. All seemed rather normal, actually, just the way I like it. I remember after arriving, I did notice one odd thing, however. I'll need to set it up, I think. We had unpacked and were actually hanging out when I decided to gather some wood for a fire that night out in the backyard in the fire pit. There was a clearing not far away from us that gave me a great view of the lake, and up the mountainside behind us. There was a clearing up there as well. Not a very big one on the side of the hill and the mountain by any means, but big enough to notice. I watched something move across it. I have to say, I was close enough to see with my own eyes that it was a person, I believe. I thought it was a person on two legs walking and crossing the area from one side to the other, and they were in a hurry too. Personally, looking back, that person was wearing all one color, black, I think, and I think it was something else after our encounter, and I don't think it was a person. But like I said, that night and day were uneventful. The second night, my daughter woke us up. She was a little bothered or scared about something she'd heard outside. I walked her back to her room as she explained that something had hit or did something on the outside of the wall of her room. I figured a bear might have been out there, or possibly a real big owl or something slammed into it. She said it sounded like a slap or a whack of some kind. Knowing we were in Oregon and seeing all the posters and signs about all the black bear around, well, you know what I was thinking. Yeah, it was a black bear. It was loud, she said, loud enough to wake her up and have her startled. For a second there, all was quiet, and she laid back down. Then, all of a sudden, I swear I heard something walking or running off just outside the window. I was thinking bear, and with the heavier sound than that of a raccoon or an opossum that I wouldn't be able to hear, I was sure it was a bear. I peeled back the curtain and saw nothing but pitch black. It was still cloudy and drizzling outside that evening. Bears, even today, are plenty up around the lakes in southern Oregon, especially in the Siskiyou National Forest and Wainema National Forest. Hey, it was spring and everything was coming alive, even something that had been alive the whole time. Bigfoot. Face in the proverbial window. I have listened to those who have suddenly and had almost fallen comatose from seeing a Bigfoot just inches or feet away outside of a window. I can attest that the feeling I was picking as I was picking my wife up off the floor after she did see this thing, not a few feet from her face, felt the same. It was a beautiful middle of the week. The sun was up, the clouds were few, and I could see a ton of fishermen on the lake dotting the place like checkers on a board. But this board was a beautiful blue in the middle of green. I decided to fish myself that morning and got lucky with a couple trout. But by noon I was on a hike around the lake with a family. Then, by late afternoon, I was starting a fire in the pit out in the back deck, and my wife was getting some chicken cooking in the kitchen. If I did not mention it before, our side of the lake was pretty empty of people at that time of the year. There were a couple, but they were at least 150 yards away, and I meant a couple, like an older couple on a vacation. We on a vacation themselves. We'd seen while walking the shoreline around the bend a bit earlier that day. That same day was quiet as well, mostly sunny, and the rain had gone. I did look around the window area where my daughter's room was for prints, tracks. I found nothing really. The ground was so thick with pine needles and other debris that my own footprints could not be noticed. We ate, made s'mores, but no, songs were not sung. Ha ha. But we had a lot of fun and turned in around 10ish when it decided to get pretty cold out. My wife and I turned in about an hour later after that. Well, we were getting ready to turn in at least. It was a shriek, not a scream, but a short and loud shriek I heard from my wife as I brushed my teeth. I put the brush down quickly, and as I walked through the door, she had a hand on her mouth and the other pointing out the window as she laid on the floor. I looked over but saw only a tree that was lit up by the one streetlight that stood on the property. She was really frightened, so much so I remember picking her up and holding her to calm her down. She kept saying, "Big animal, monster, there's a monster outside." I did not know what to think at first, but the incident with my daughter came flooding through my mind, and I was starting to think something was actually going on, that there was something visiting the house at night, possibly that bear. I looked out the window and just saw blackness beyond the edge of the light. My wife said its head was almost above the window. That would put it around 7 to 7.5 foot, I was guessing. She also said the word monster, and that was followed by Bigfoot. She told me the face was that of a deformed monkey like thing, and the face was long, but the eyes were, well, human like. There was not too much more description as the thing bolted quickly, she said. I finally got her calmed down over some tea in the kitchen, but that would not last long. As I watched, as a literal monster walked from one side of the backyard area to the other moments later. The Bigfoot of the lake. It was a total shock, but as my wife was talking to me, trying to recall what she saw exactly for the briefest of time, this Bigfoot walked from one side of the backyard to the other, just on the other side of the fire pit, just inside the tree line that separated the yard and the shore of the lake. I dropped my cup, and my wife turned to see the tail end of this thing walking past in the yard. She squealed again this time, and I had to pick my mind and my jaw up off the floor. And all the while, adrenaline was pumping through me like a Mack truck down a freeway. It seemed to have turned a bit, as if it was walking around the side of the house, and it did. If it was not for the porch light being left on earlier, I don't think I would have seen it walk by at all. But I did. I ran over to the living room after shutting the kitchen light off behind me. I told my wife politely, of course, to be real quiet. I opened the shutters on the front window, and there it was, standing there in between two trees just inside the light of the street light outside. It was tall, and all of the guess I had made earlier, maybe even taller than 7 or 7.5 feet. It was not fat, and it was not skinny either. It was just a tall, bulky mass of V-shaped Bigfoot of the woods just staring back at us, or the house in general. It was bent at the waist, and it had one hand on the tree next to it, and one almost touching the ground beneath it. Its arms were long, hairy like the rest of the body, and muscular it looked to be. I made out quite a bit of this thing, except the face. It was covered in hair, it seemed, except there was some lighter parts to it, which I took for skin. It moved constantly, swaying, wiggling a bit as well, and it just stared at the house in our direction. My daughter and son heard the commotion and were now standing beside my wife, staring out at this thing. I did not hear them come in. This is how focused I was on the thing. It was a stare down, it seemed, for at least a minute, maybe a tad bit over. Either way, it seemed like an eternity. I could not make out the color of this thing, but if I had to guess, I would say jet black. Maybe a real dark brown, perhaps. But I'm not completely sure, even today. Moments later, and with murmuring between my kids and wife, the thing startled us all as it stepped out into the light a bit more, then turned and walked off into the woods in the opposite direction of the lake. We were stunned, in shock, and did not sleep until morning, and I mean all of us. Oh, you met the neighbor. There were no more incidents or visuals the rest of the trip, and we kept it to ourselves, except for I did say something to the owners a week later. Their response was one of surprise as they literally said, and I quote, "Oh, you met our neighbor Petey." Petey was the name of Bigfoot, one that frequented the home during the early and late spring on and off. They said there was no harm and had never caused anyone harm and or raised any ruckus for that matter. They left it alone. It left them alone. The owner said it was curious was all. Looking back, I cannot see the face, and I wonder if it had a look of curiosity about us. Maybe, maybe not. Personally, I do not trust wild animals, no matter how smart someone may say they are. They are still wild. No, we do not stay up there anymore, but we do head up to the Lake of the Woods for the day here and there. It is a beautiful place after all. Besides, it's great fishing. But that is our story, and if you get up that way, I suggest you do some bigfooting on the backside of that lake. Thanks, Jim.